If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, aging. In a recent TEDx talk titled The Midlife Muscle Crisis, Why We've Gotten Obesity All Wrong, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon shared 3 strategies for maintaining the health of your muscle. In this episode, we discuss these and how we can increase muscle mass and consume more high-quality protein for aging well.
Dr. Armstrong, I recently came upon a TED Talk featuring Dr. Gabrielle Lyons titled The Midlife Muscle Crisis, Why We've Gotten Obesity All Wrong. She shared many of the ideas that we discuss here in the Aging Well podcast, and I thought that this might be a good topic for this episode.
Sounds like a great topic. I also watched her TED Talk. What was your initial take on the topic?
Well, first of all, I love Gabrielle Lyons. I know I've mentioned her in a couple of our past episodes. I just think she's kind of taken the whole medical world and flipping it on its head. She's kind of revolutionized the way that we approach diets, especially taking in more proteins and meats when previously 10 years ago, when it was like, no, meats are bad and stick to more plant-based. And she's like, no, we actually need the protein in order to help build and recover. And through her research and through her studies, she's helped several individuals regulate their hormones, especially at an older age when it's, as we've discussed, it's really critical. So I'm a huge fan of her. And I think anything that she has to say, I definitely listen, just because she does a lot of research to back up what she says. So one of the things that she does talk about is a midlife muscle crisis. What is a midlife muscle crisis?
Well, what she's talking about there is that, it really kind of goes back to the obesity crisis and how, she mentions in there that I think it's about 74% of the U.S. population is over fat or obese, and just the significant health problems that go along with that. And so typically what we've been addressing is the fat. And the issue that she has with all that is that we're not necessarily over fat. Of course, many of the American populations are over fat, but the more significant problem that we're having is that we are under muscled. And so in order to combat the obesity crisis, we have to approach it from the standpoint of how do we increase muscle mass in our population, more so than how do we reduce the body fat percentage.
So that kind of opens the door for, a super debatable topic of BMI, because we kind of establish everything in American health based off of BMI. And I know your opinion, but I want to hear it. What's your opinion of BMI?
BMI is bullshit. It is a reasonable tool to give you a quick little estimate of kind of where body composition is at. But the reality is, if you want to use something like BMI, you look at your patient as a physician, you can tell whether they are over fat or not. And so BMI doesn't tell us anything. My weight shifts here and there, but I could lose a significant amount of body fat and my BMI not really fall below the normal ranges. I'm always going to be over fat. I guarantee I will be over fat. If I fall below the over fat BMI, I'm going to be concerned, because that means that I have lost a significant amount of muscle mass and probably a significant amount of body fat. I think personally, from the research I've looked at, particularly coming out of COVID, that we should be really targeting an ideal BMI. If you're just looking simply at BMI, being somewhere in the range of about 23 to 25, maybe 26 BMI. Because if we drop below that, not only are we likely to be significantly under fat, which can have unhealthy consequences for both males and females, but more than likely we're under muscled. And most American population is going to be what finally some physicians are starting to refer to as skinny fat. So you may have a very normal BMI, but you have very little muscle mass. That is not healthy. And of course, if you're over a BMI of 30, unless you are the most elite of power lifters and weightlifters, and you have just a tremendous amount of muscle mass, and I would probably venture to guess that there's going to be other health issues from that because you're probably on steroids, you're going to be unhealthy. And so, yeah, that top limit is a very unhealthy number, but BMI doesn't tell us anything. It just tells us that our weight is high relative to our height, but it doesn't tell us, is that muscle? Is it fat? Is it a combination of the two?
So if it's a well-known thing that BMI is so obsolete, why do we still do it? It doesn't necessarily make sense. Now, if someone were to say, well, we do it because it's super easy and it's super easy and not as expensive versus going to a bod pod or a hydro tank to balance that out. But we can still do the skin grafts with that little
Skin grafts?
Yeah, or the skin
skin folds?
Thank you. You can still do
we don't need to be doing skin grafts.
Yeah, the skin folds with the pinchy thing. That's not that difficult to do, and it's really consistent, and it's the most accurate way so far. That's cheap and inexpensive. I don't know. It's, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's the most accurate, cheap way of determining what percent body fat. You know why? To answer your question, it's because they don't discuss exercise physiology in medical school. They get very little experience with diet, nutrition, and exercise when it comes to training our physicians in this country. And that is pure bullshit. And I think from a personal standpoint, I think that every physician should be going through an exercise science program as a pre-medicine route because you're going to have physicians that are understanding these ideas that we're talking about. And I really love Dr. Lyons' approach that she talks about muscle-centric medicine, that you've got to focus on the role of the muscle as an organ, as she calls it, muscle is the organ of longevity. Mm-hmm. And we know from the literature and we know from many, many studies that one of the keys to longevity is going to be your lean muscle mass. And yet we ignore that in the medical profession. We prefer to prescribe medicine as opposed to exercise when it comes to improving one's health. And I think that is one of the biggest consequences that is leading to this obesity crisis, is that we do not recognize the role of exercise, physical activity, and particularly muscle building type of exercise, or the preservation of muscle through exercise and through, as we'll be talking about, dietary intake of protein.
Right. Well, that's another thing why I feel like BMI is so obsolete. And instead of focusing on, my weight is within this range, we should be focusing on our body composition. And I think we should dive into the subject of being over fat versus being under muscled.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's a huge difference. And you mentioned it, being skinny fat. Mm-hmm. And I remember actually being in your exercise science class. We had the opportunity to have a bod pod, and there was this one gal in particular there, and she was pretty lean. Like she wasn't by any means what you would physically look at and say, "Oh man, this person's morbidly obese." But I do recall that she didn't really have muscle tone. Not trying to do any body shame or anything like that. But I remember when she went into the bod pod and it actually was able to measure her body fat percentage, the numbers were actually shockingly high as far as percentage goes. And And could that be embarrassing for an individual? Yeah, it could be, but it also could be a huge eye-opening experience of, whoa, I may not reflect that I'm overweight. However, because of the visceral fat, I'm actually at a higher risk of being in danger for my longevity through life. And I kind of want to dive into that a
Yeah,
little
and
bit.
I think it's very important when we have a conversation about obesity is that first of all we have the conversation because it is a major issue. 74% of the US population, and maybe even more than that, is over fat or obese. And we know that obesity is a central factor in metabolic syndrome. And I read something recently, and it was in a source that I was really surprised that they would use the language like this. I think it was like in a medical article of some sort. But they talked about metabolic syndrome being central to obesity. It's like, no, it's the opposite. It's like you don't get metabolic syndrome and then become obese. You get metabolic syndrome from being obese. And for a listener who might not be familiar with metabolic syndrome, that is the kind of coexistence of insulin resistance, high blood triglycerides, and hypertension. And all of that can evolve from being obese. And so when we talk about obesity, it is not an issue of appearance. It's not fat shaming. And we should not fat shame somebody because there are some people who are over fat that are a hell of a lot healthier than people that are what would be perceived as being, a normal body body shape or whatever.
Totally.
And we have to look at the muscle mass and the overall functionality of that individual. And when obesity becomes a medical issue, it absolutely needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed before it even becomes that issue. But let's not look at what our bodies look like. Let's look at how our bodies function. And that is the critical issue when it comes to obesity. I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging.
Another subject that Dr. Lyons discussed in the TED Talk was 23% are meeting exercise requirements. And that's shockingly low for me. I mean, if you think about it, you're like, oh, well, obviously that makes sense. But then at the same time, 23%, that's really alarming.
Well, and what's even more alarming about that, and I think we've brought this statistic up repeatedly, it's a statistic that kind of emerged kind of in a lot of the research that was done during COVID. And it was really shocking to me to hear that only 23% of the US population are meeting the minimum exercise guidelines. And one important thing I think to note on that is that we're talking about the minimum ACSM guidelines, which tends to and has historically been much more focused on cardiovascular activity and less on resistance training. So when they're talking the resistance training, it's like 3 days a week and doing light weights for higher repetitions at the gym. It is not the level of requirement that is going to build and sustain muscle mass for good health. It's minimal health. And so when you look at that 23% that are meeting the minimum exercise guidelines, what percentage of those are actually meeting a level of exercise that is going to significantly improve health, not just simply maintain health? And so we're at an even smaller percentage that are approaching life from the viewpoint that Dr. Lyons is pushing with this idea of muscle is an organ of longevity. And so it's very scary to me that we are so inactive in this country and we can't seem to grasp that we need to be investing time, energy, and resources into getting people more physically active and, doing it for the health of it, not because somebody on Instagram is showing their, well sculpted abs. I think that has turned a lot of people away from exercise as well, because we start looking at it being an appearance issue rather than a health issue.
Yeah.
Can you say I have some pretty strong opinions
Yeah,
when it
definitely.
comes to this
Well,
stuff?
I mean, you should, though, especially when having a podcast like this, where we are literally trying to open eyes and the doorway to a more fulfilling life as you get older, as you age, and adding that longevity to it. So, yes, you should be passionate about this. It should kind of ruffle your feathers, seeing that the society or the culture or whatever that you live in is not living up to their own potential that they could, and you being a light to allow people to see, the whole picture of, hey, I can take back my life and I can have control over it, and I don't have to just be shackled to this one set of mindset, or this one narrow mindedness of, well, I got to go to the doctor to get a pill because I'm overweight. I can take back my life, and I can do it through exercise, through nutrition, through listening to the Aging Well podcast.
Yeah. So you mentioned about being a light. I think I'm beyond wanting to be a light and trying to figure out how can I be the fire under somebody's ass to get them moving and exercising and making the changes in their lifestyle that will prolong their lives and make them healthier and improve the quality of those longer years. Because, yeah, we could talk about longevity, but if those years are not effectively lived, what's the purpose? And so when we talk about longevity and the importance of muscle mass in longevity, it's because we can have better quality of life in those third age years so that we minimize fourth age.
Right.
And so as we kind of move on, I mean, one of the more central factors that she talked about in the podcast was uh, protein. And, one thing she mentioned is that 40% of women don't get the minimum dietary requirement for protein. And she outlined 3 strategies for maintaining the health of your muscle. She talked about, number 1, resistance exercise 3 times per week. Number 2, increase your high quality of protein. She suggests 40 grams of high quality protein at the first and last meal of the day. And hence that leads to number 3, which is increase your protein threshold in the first and last meals of the day.
Well, I can't remember if she talks about it in that particular TED Talk, but through her other podcast, through her other TED Talks, through her literature that she has out there, one of the good source of protein that she does suggest is like a grass-fed beef. One, because of the protein that it's able to take in, but 2, the fats actually help regulate the hormones, which help through everything. And for those, for our female listeners that are actually listening, 40% of women that don't meet that minimum daily protein, they really should dive into what Dr. Lyons is saying. There's a ton of research out there that she does and writes about, that she actually has discovered that protein is so critical, not only for muscle mass, but it's also for our immune system, for the bone density, for cognitive thinking. It's really cool. So I really think that we should not take that with a grain of salt and roll our eyes, but really try to do our best to take in as much protein as possible. So we talk about the importance of resistance training quite a bit. So this should be nothing new to our regular listeners.
Yes, and I hope that we have gotten through to the listener. I've made it a mission in the classes I teach to underscore this to my exercise science students. Lifting weights must be a priority. I've had to unlearn decades of learning how we need to focus on aerobic exercise for heart health and to focus much more on strength and conditioning and weight training.
That's right. I recall you sharing an awakening that you had at the ACSM conference some years ago.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what year that was, but it was a year where they were honoring many of the fellows for the American College of Sports Medicine. And, so we had all these individuals who were really big names in exercise physiology. And, most of them were long since retired and, really well into their third age, as we would talk about on this podcast. And I saw several of them walking around. And as I watched them walking, it's like, I see these people who were, and it was interesting because it was predominantly the males that were in that category that were, very kyphotic, that slouched posture, shuffling in their walk, very frail looking. And I'm looking at them and I'm like, I don't want to look like that when I'm in my 80s and 90s as an exercise physiologist. We should not look that way. And it just occurred to me, these are the people who were pushing for years cardio, 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 and not really talking about weight training. I think in a previous podcast, I mentioned Dave Draper, not the Dave Draper from the Beverly Hillbillies and body lifter of the 1960s and 70s, but another Dave Draper who is in strength and conditioning. And the conversation we had where he kind of started talking about these 160-pound, the exercise physiologists are a bunch of 160-pound weaklings who will tell you not to, never lifted a weight in their life and are telling you not to do a full squat. And having that conversation with him, and I'm thinking, oh my God, he's going to turn around and ask me what I do, and I'm an exercise physiologist. And when he asked me, and I said, oh, I got my master's in exercise physiology, he looked at me and said, you're not like the rest of them. And I have taken that for years to be one of the biggest compliments I've ever gotten in my career. But it still has taken me years to kind of recognize that we need to de-emphasize cardio a little bit more and increase the emphasis on weight training as we age. And too many, in fact, probably the large majority of aging Americans do not lift weights. Most of them are looking at, I got to lose body fat because I keep having this weight creeping on me. So what they do, they go do cardio. They do a significant amount of cardio and caloric restriction, and they lose fat, but they also lose muscle mass. They never gain that muscle mass back, but they gain the fat back. So they diet some more. And so it's this cyclic yo-yoing of dieting that leads to ultimately an increase in percent body fat while seeing a decrease in muscle mass, or what we refer to as sarcopenia.
I was going to say, doesn't adding more muscle mass increase your metabolism, which in return burns more fat throughout the day?
Yeah. That's fairly well known, which again shocks me that we don't emphasize that in the medical profession rather than treating obesity with diet and pharmacology as opposed to resistance training.
Okay, so speaking of resistance training, they say 3 days a week of resistance training is ideal. What's your thoughts on this recommendation?
I think it's just the bare minimum. I'd like to see people engaged in resistance exercise at least 4 to 6 days a week.
So what do you recommend as an exercise frequency for aerobic and resistance training for aging well?
Personally, I'd like to schedule up to 11 or 12 exercise sessions per week.
So how is that possible?
Scheduling and prioritizing. Remember, I always talk about opportunity costs. We all have the same day. And so how are we scheduling our day is going to impact how much exercise we can do. I would not say, 2 1-hour sessions per day. There are people who, will go to the gym and they're spending an hour or 2 hours there. And to do that twice a day is next to impossible. But for a lot of us, but myself in particular, I don't have the time to get enough exercise in a single session. So for me to get up in the morning, get my exercise in so that our home gym is now available for my wife to use so that I can get ready, get my daughter off to high school because I have to drive her to the school because they don't provide a bus, and then get to work and do my work and then come home and, coach and do the other things that I'm, trying to get accomplished in the day. I only have a limited window. And so for me, I get up about 4:30 in the morning which gives me about an hour really to get a workout in. And so I'm generally going to be looking at about 40 minutes of resistance exercise in the mornings. And that's not enough to accomplish everything I want to do. And if I was going to lift 3 days a week, I would either get much less done or I would have to go longer sessions. And so for me, I get my resistance done in the morning and then I try and do more cardio then in the afternoon. So I try to compartmentalize the exercise, do my resistance training in the morning because that's my top priority. And then I try then to do cardio in the afternoons. And if I miss a cardio session, it's not so bad because as long as I'm getting a few sessions a week, I'm going to have enough stimulus to maintain and even maybe slightly improve my cardiovascular health.
So how much of that is cardio and how much of that is resistance training?
Um, so again, about 6 lifting sessions per week. And for cardio, first thing I'll do is I'll try and walk the dogs on a daily basis, and because they need to be walked. So I walk them separately. My neighbors are often like, "The dogs not walk together?" It's like, yeah, they'll walk together, but I can get twice as much physical activity by walking them individually. I haven't seen people kind of pick up on that little recommendation there because I'll see people with 3 dogs, walking at the same time. It's like, you can triple your exercise by walking them individually. But so I walk them separately so I can get more activity. This gives me about 3 miles of walking, and I walk at a very brisk pace. So it's not the best for cardio respiratory. I mean, it's probably hitting that minimal threshold, what we would call kind of the minimum effective volume of cardiovascular activity, but it's enough to maintain my health. If I'm keeping it at a brisk pace, ideally I should be able to maintain that brisk pace as I attempt to age well. And so I do that as a minimum. And then to maintain a higher level of cardiorespiratory fitness, I try to do at least 3 high intensity interval training sessions per week. And that becomes a little bit more challenging because of scheduling and things like that. But if I can get that in there, I'm good and golden.
There's also some science behind that as well, right? Resistance training first thing in the morning, kickstart your metabolism, and then as the afternoon or evening comes in, get that cardio in.
Yeah, there is some literature in there, but I take a lot of that literature with a grain of salt. It's pretty equivocal. Some recommend like for your best strength is going to be generally midday or later day because your muscles are warmed up. You can actually lift more. Your nutrition has been there, and so you're going to have a little bit better nutrition for fueling the muscle and for stimulating hypertrophy. But for me, the only time I can do it is first thing in the morning. So that's when you do your priority exercise. When first thing in the morning, you get up and you can have discussion about fasting exercise versus unfasting exercise. And there's so much out there. The key is to do it and then get the best recovery and nutrition that you can to support that. And whether it's better or worse to do it at different times of the day, to me, that is so negligible that the most important thing is just getting it done. And so for me, the weight's early, get it done. I may not be able to lift as much weight, may not get as much stimulus, but I get the stimulus better than not doing it later. And then if I can get that cardio in the afternoon, I'm going to try and do just some high intensity interval sessions several times a week in order to, in a very short period of time, get an adequate stimulus to improve or maintain my cardiovascular health.
Tabata?
Yes, Tabata with air quotes. But very few can do, and the reason I use the air quotes is very few can do the true IE1 protocol that Tabata and others detailed in their research. But a 10 to 15 minute high intensity interval workout of 8 intervals of 20 seconds of very high intensity aerobic exercise, followed by 10 seconds of rest, can have tremendous benefits. It doesn't take a lot of time to positively affect the cardiorespiratory endurance. Remember, Kenneth Cooper said that if you're running for more than 30 minutes, you're doing it for more than your health.
So what do you do for your resistance exercise? And I know we kind of talk about the superior seven.
Would
Well,
you stop calling this superior
superior seven,
seven?
and I know you're a
I
huge
refer to it
advocate.
like the basic five, but Corbin keeps bringing up this seven, superior seven, and he's talking about, basically these seven key movement patterns that need to be included in our resistance exercise. And that's a squat motion, a hip hinge motion, horizontal pull, horizontal push, vertical push, and some form of carries, like farmer carries for core stability.
Superior,
Yeah.
and there's seven of them.
But I mean, reason I try and kind of avoid labeling it as a seven, because now that pushes people to say, well, I have to do these seven different exercises in a workout. And that's not absolutely necessary. You need to be kind of getting a combination of those different seven movement patterns throughout the week. The reason I like the basic five is because it breaks it down a little bit more simply, that I got to do at least a few times a week a squatting motion, a few times a week do some form of hip hinge, a few times a week doing some form of push, whether it's a vertical push or horizontal push, so bench press, well, overhead press versus a bench press, and then some kind of pulling motion. And there are varying angles that we can do the pulling motions. It's not just overhead, it's not just a horizontal pull. So varying within those five basic exercises: squat, deadlift or Romanian deadlift variation, bench press, overhead press, and a rowing exercise. Break that up and divide that within 6 sessions per week. You can, and a lot of people will kind of poo poo this idea, but if you are capable of recovering, and most of us that are lifting weights for just general health and are not bodybuilders, are not athletes that are training really intensely, we can do the same five basic movement patterns 4, 5, 6 times a week and not have it negatively impact our recoverability. As long as we can recover from the exercise, we can do it. Now, that being said, I generally over 6 sessions will split up the workouts so that I'm, doing the exercises probably about a minimal of 3 times per week, but in varying forms of split. You could do an upper body split, lower body split. You can do a push pull type of split. So, like with a push pull, it would be doing squat, bench press, overhead press. Pull would be, say, RDLs and rowing exercises. Or you can do, some will often do a leg one day, push another day, pull another day, split. The reason I don't like that split quite as much is because it's only giving you 2 days per week of the particular body parts. But the more frequent we can exercise, the more exercise we can fit into that small window that we have. And so we have less excuse for not we have less excuse for not exercising. And if we miss a session, you just simply don't feel like getting up in the morning, or you have a meeting, or, I didn't lift yesterday because I was supposed to have a doctor's appointment, although, I get a call once I missed my window to work out that the doctor had to cancel because he was out of town. Rolling my eyes here. But if you miss a session, you're not missing a significant amount of that exercise. So did I answer that enough, or do I think we need to kind of dive into that?
Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't talk about Zercher squats.
Well, we can talk about the Zercher squat. I mean, I think that is one of the most efficient and effective exercises that we can do. And again, if we can't lift for enough duration of time to do a wider range of exercises, you look at an exercise like the Zercher squat for an aging adult that maybe has some back issues, that doing a back squat heavy puts too much compression load on the spine and causes some pain. The Zercher squat takes that compression away. It moves the weight in front, where we're getting some bicep work. You're getting a significant amount of upper back postural work. We've talked before about Carmine's law that, strength plus posture equals balance. So you're working on that getting a bit more erect posture. It's going to help with breathing and respiration. And another thing that we should be considering as we age. And it also works the core very significantly because you're having to really tighten up those muscles to hold that weight so you don't collapse forward. And, it's great on the legs. And so, yeah, I'm big on the Zercher variations. My wrestlers have come to love the Zercher squat. And I had one kid come in and he had been, I think he missed, been not working out for a while and came in and said something about his dad saying, commenting about this, the exercise, what's this exercise that is getting all these guys jacked? And it was the Zercher squat. I mean, the wrestlers recognized that has been one of their best and most favorite exercises.
So let's switch gears to protein. Now, I know what Dr. Lyons says about protein, but what's Dr. Armstrong think about protein? Why is protein important? Specifically, why is high quality protein important to aging well?
Well, as people age, they tend to lose muscle mass and strength. This is a condition we've often talked about, and it's known as sarcopenia. And I talk in my physiology of exercise class. Statistically, people are going to lose about 10% of their muscle mass from the ages of 25 to 50, an additional 40% from 50 to 80. And we often think of it as simply being age related or age associated, and it's really not. It's activity associated. And some of it is going to be diet as well. So as people age and they are tending to lose muscle mass and strength, we need to be consuming an adequate amount of high quality protein because that can help preserve muscle mass and strength. And it supports overall physical function and reduces the risk of falls and frailty. Proteins are essential for repairing tissues and supporting wound healing, which becomes increasingly important as people age due to the body's reduced ability to repair itself. Some high quality proteins contain essential nutrients like calcium and vitamin D, which are crucial for bone health. This is particularly important for older adults to prevent conditions such as osteoporosis. Proteins play a role in proper functioning of the immune system. Adequate protein intake is essential to produce immune cells and antibodies, which help the body defend against infections and illnesses that become more common as we age. Proteins are crucial for producing various hormones and enzymes that regulate bodily functions, including metabolism and energy production. So as people age, maintaining these functions becomes increasingly important for overall health. And protein tends to be more satiating than carbohydrates or fats, which can help in managing weight. With age, maintaining a healthy body weight becomes important for overall health and reducing the risk of certain chronic diseases, as we've been talking about.
And what are high quality proteins?
Well, when aiming for high quality protein, it's generally advisable to focus on sources that provide a complete set of amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. Sources like lean meats, poultry, fish, dairy, eggs, legumes, nuts, and seeds are generally considered high quality protein sources.
All right, so it sounds like when you're talking about complete proteins, you're talking about the essential amino acids that we primarily get from meat source because they're fully complete. What about incomplete proteins, like for an individual who's on a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet?
That, if you choose to be on a vegan diet, which, I have no problems with that. I do think it's much easier to get good quality protein by consuming lean meats and poultry and dairy and eggs. But if you choose to be on a vegetarian diet, you have to be much, much more focused on protein and the quality of the proteins that you're getting from the plant sources. You can get all your essential amino acids with plant sources, but it takes a lot more effort, a lot more balance of food, a lot more creativity, a lot more food preparation. And so for a lot of people who are eating a vegetarian diet, whether consciously or unconsciously, they may be lacking many of the quality proteins that the body needs in order to age well.
Yeah, I think Dr. Lyons discuss, maybe not in this TED talk, but in a different thing, to stay away from the beyond meats, the impossible meats. They're those synthetic meats from plant derived. They can do a lot more damage because they're not. People think, oh, I'm doing a healthier choice, but it's not. There's a lot more carcinogenics inside of them, I guess, and
I'm
things.
not sure about the carcinogenics, but I think anytime you are processing the food, you are diminishing the quality in some frame or another. And so, we talk about not eating processed foods. Lean meats are not processed. Now, granted, there are certain downsides of certain meats, and you know the quality of the meat is going to be an issue, but also, sometimes getting lesser quality meat is going to give you better protein than not getting the meat at all. But, we don't want processed meats, and we don't want processed pretend meats either, because how is that any healthier than consuming, a balance of legumes, nuts, seeds, and other plants that contain protein? You know, if you if you have to eat a fake burger because you like the taste of a burger, then why can't you eat a burger? And again, I know a lot of vegetarians, it's more of a moral issue for them, but if it's a moral issue, then eat plant-based foods in their natural sources so that it's going to be healthier for you rather than processing it to pretend that you're eating meat.
So what about protein powders? Because those are processed, right? But I also feel like whey protein, I mean, it's taking the whey from the actual milk source itself. So it's just a dehydrated version of that. I feel like that wouldn't be as bad.
It's not really dehydrated, but they've extracted the whey from the dairy, and they basically separate it. You'll have whey, and then you have the casein protein that comes out of dairy, and then it's dried and it's put into a powder form. Now, I recommend whey as a supplement, and in some situations, casein protein as well. I think those are two of the five, possibly six things that I would put on my, recommended supplementation list. But we got to remember that supplementation means in addition to, meaning that it's in addition to what we are normally eating. And so it is to replace something that we are not getting in our diet. And so ideally, we want to get the bulk of our protein from these whole food sources. So again, lean meat, poultry, fish, dairy, eggs, legumes, and so on, rather than in a liquid form as a powdered drink. Now, that being said, in order to get more of this protein into our diet, it can behoove us to use whey. I think whey is one of the best ways to get protein into our bodies post workout because it's much more absorbable, digests faster than whole meats, certainly faster than legumes and nuts and so on. And so it's a good supplement to get that protein into the muscle to build the muscle. It is also a good avenue for getting protein during the inconvenient times in our schedule. Now, my schedule this year is probably the worst for getting a healthy diet through the day because on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm actually teaching. I have a class that goes Monday through Thursday from 9 to 10. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, that's followed by a class that goes from 10 to 12 and then 12 to 2. And then I have to rush off to, an hour drive to the high school to coach, strength and conditioning for another hour, hour and a half. And so for me to sit down and eat a meal during that period of time, it's next to impossible. What am I going to do? Stand up in front of my class and, eat a bowl of rice and protein? It's just not going to happen. I mean, it's hard enough for me when students bring yangs into class, and
Oh
the
man.
smell of that teriyaki chicken permeating from the back of the classroom just gets my stomach rumbling. But for me, in a typical schedule, what I would normally do is I get up, I work out, I have a whey shake that has some good quality carbohydrate in it, usually some spinach, blueberries, um, something that's going to be quickly absorbable, got some carbs, got some protein to it. That helps me recover from my workout. Then I get to campus. I have my scrambled eggs with chicken and broccoli in it and like an apple, but I have time to sit and eat that. I don't have that time anymore. And then later in the day, because I have classes and a break between classes, I might have a whey protein shake and then come home, either have like a small protein meal or maybe another shake in the afternoon workout. And then I have my dinner where I have, again, a good source of lean protein along with fruits and vegetables and so on.
I'm surprised you're not taking in a casein protein since it's slow digesting to have you be full for a lot longer. I feel like whey protein is a good, I mean, it's a it's a good source of protein, but I don't know, after an hour or so drinking a whey protein, I always feel way hungrier. That could just be me though.
Uh, that's a really good question, and I think it's a really good point. It's something that I would certainly consider, but for me, I don't like casein protein. There's just something about the texture of it, particularly if it sits for a while. And so I make these shakes in the morning. I have them in my cooler. I take them to work, and then I drink them as it's time to drink them. Casein protein for me tends to thicken up, and it just becomes a little less palatable to me. And so I don't like casein protein. Doesn't mean it's not good for others, and it's definitely a better protein for slower absorption. And so, yeah, I would recommend that over whey protein the further you get away from your workout. And so, like a lot of meal replacement protein shakes will have casein protein in it or a blend of casein and whey. I think it's a more of a matter of palatability and convenience and preference. What tastes better? What are you going to consume? And a little bit less so the subtle differences in the quality of those two proteins. I mean, both are going to give you a very good source of amino acids to help build the muscle. They're quick and easy to ingest, because you can just drink down the protein. And then I would not recommend drinking whey protein or casein protein shakes midday when you're not very active. Like in a work day where you're busy, you're less likely to, if the whey protein doesn't sustain you long enough, you're going to start getting hungry and want to be grabbing a snack or something like that. So for me, I don't have the opportunity to eat. So whether or not it makes me hungry or not, it's not going to be an issue. So it's just getting that quick source of protein so that I get my daily requirement of protein throughout the day, and then I can get back to work and do what I have to do. It's less than ideal, but it works within my schedule. So presently with that pretty intensive schedule, I generally load up in the morning 2 protein shakes and some hard-boiled eggs and an apple. So I can consume those pretty quickly and easily throughout the day. It's less than ideal for my overall macro balance, but it's working, and I just tend to end up eating a little bit more in the evenings. And in the mornings, I'm actually not doing a shake around my workout. I'm actually kind of experimenting a little bit with just drinking a hydration beverage with creatine and branched chain amino acids in it, because that gets me through the workout. It gets into my system a lot more quickly because I'm not able to eat immediately before or after the workout. And that seems to be helping quite a bit.
I think everyone should be taking creatine. Personally, I don't think we get enough of it. We've talked about it several times on this podcast. The research is out there, the literature. I mean, we need creatine. We need it for our physical health, for our muscle development, for our brain function. Creatine, we need it.
Yeah, and I think we have talked about this a few times on the podcast where the literature is, I want to say it's about 2/3 of the population is creatine deficient, which means they're getting less than 1 gram per day of creatine in their diet. And that comes from, not eating good quality protein sources, not eating enough protein. And it behooves us to supplement that.
Right.
Whether we're aging, whether we are an athlete trying to build muscle, or whether we're even a young person, because, brains that are developing need creatine. And if a kid isn't getting enough protein and enough creatine in their diet, the brain isn't developing well enough. And it's also been linked to depression. And so, yeah, I think creatine comes along with this. And she doesn't really talk about that in terms of the emphasizing high quality protein. But if we're getting high quality protein that includes meat, we are likely to be getting sufficient enough creatine. But since we're not, we need to improve our intake of high quality protein and very likely supplement a little bit of creatine into our diet just to make sure, because you can't really have too much creatine.
Right. Well, so it's almost strongly recommended for those individuals who are making a lifestyle decision of going vegan or vegetarian. Well, vegetarian for sure, to take your BCAAs, take your creatine supplements, because you're not getting the complete protein factor from your plant sources, and creatine, you're really not getting that from any source. Now, I don't know if a vegan can take creatine, but I think everyone should be taking creatine.
Yeah, I don't know that the moral issues when it comes to creatine supplementation, because the creatine is likely to come from an animal source. But it's I don't know how do I even address that question, because it's like it's too important to not get into our diet and to fuss with where it came from, because you're not eating an animal when you're eating creatine. You're just simply taking creatine. And I'd have to look into a little bit more of kind of the sources of where the micronized creatine monohydrate and those different types of creatine come from in order to get it. But again, we talk about not having processed foods, but it's highly processed. I mean, it's basically, consuming something that is completely separate from the source and from which it came.
Yeah.
So,
well, Dr. Lyons recommends aiming for 40 grams of high quality protein in the first and last meals of the day. What are your thoughts?
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that is a beginning target, for somebody who is not consuming enough protein. If you can just focus on the first meal and the last meal of the day, then that's going to be getting you in the right direction. Ideally, we should be looking at how much protein do I need for my body for the day. And that generally a fairly reasonable recommendation on protein intake would be about 1 gram per pound of body weight, and then just divide that up by the number of meals that you are consuming. So 40 may be a little bit high if you're eating like 6 meals a day, and particularly in the morning, if it's right around the workout, it might not be quite as absorbable. But 40 grams of high quality whole food protein is going to take a while to digest. And so that is putting those amino acids into your system at a rather steady rate over the course of the day. At the end of the day, it gives you the whole night for that protein to be digested, absorbed, and fueling the muscles during recovery. And so I think it's a very, very good recommendation. And again, it's going to be really a more minimum recommendation for improving our protein intake. And then, you mentioned casein protein. I think in order to kind of follow her recommendation there, depending on your meal timing, a casein protein drink just prior to bed can help to improve. Yeah, it's going to help improve sleep for one thing, but it's also going to give you that slowly absorbing protein throughout the evening that's going to help you to stimulate muscle growth and the maintenance of that muscle mass.
By spiking amino acids in the blood for a longer period of time?
Well, spiking implies that it's a jump up and then it comes right back down. I think it's giving it a more steady source of amino acids throughout the day so that your tissues are receiving it as it needs to, rather than getting this big spike of amino acids and there's nowhere for it to go, right? And so if we are inactive through much of the day, we don't want high spiking carbohydrate or protein, because if the muscle isn't starved for it, it's not going to get that insulin spike that's going to get it into the muscle. It's going to ultimately end up going into fat, or the the liver can convert those amino acids into carbohydrates or fats, and it doesn't go into building muscle tissue. And one thing, again, I mentioned about experimenting with branched chain amino acids during my morning lifting sessions. I think that is one way, if I'm not going to be eating a lot of protein, get those amino acids into the system to help kind of stimulate a little bit of muscle growth. And another thing with protein in the morning, think of the typical American breakfast anymore. High grain, high fruit, high carbohydrate kind of foods. And we're sedentary. We're waking up in the morning. We're well nourished from the day before. Our muscles should be pretty well capped off with their glycogen and fuel energy, and we go and we eat like a donut for breakfast, and we get this huge insulin spike. Those carbohydrates have nowhere to go. They get converted into fat, stored as fat, and we have, after that insulin spike, a sudden drop in blood glucose levels. What's going to happen?
You're going to crash throughout the day.
Well, you're going to crash, but you're going to get hungry again, right?
Yeah.
Because your body, as it's crashing, wants more food. So what are you going to do? You're going to go for the most convenient, accessible foods. And for a lot of people, that's the snack machine, that's the candy bar in the desk. It's more junk food that, again, gives us a spike. And so we go through these repeated cycles of eating crappy food in order to sustain our satisfaction and to curb our hunger. And so if I'm not eating much in the morning, I want to make sure that I'm getting amino acids into my diet. I want to get my protein first thing in the morning. That's going to sustain me through much of the day. It's also going to give me the protein that I need in order to recover from exercise or whatever activity that I'm doing.
So branched chain amino acids are essential amino acids, meaning that the body cannot produce them on its own, and they must be obtained through diet. The 3 branched chain amino acids are leucine, isoleucine, and valine.
Correct. And while branched chain amino acids are important for individuals of all ages, there are specific reasons aging adults might want to consider supplementing their diets with branched chain amino acids. As people age, there is a natural decline in muscle mass and strength. We've talked about this. It is a condition known as sarcopenia. Branched chain amino acids, particularly leucine, may play a crucial role in stimulating muscle protein synthesis, which can aid in preserving muscle mass and strength in older adults, even if they're not lifting weights, by the way. In older adults, the body's ability to synthesize proteins can decline, making branched chain amino acid supplementation beneficial in supporting that process. Branched chain amino acids are known to reduce exercise-induced muscle damage and muscle soreness. For aging individuals that are engaging in physical activity or exercise routines, branched chain amino acid supplementation might support quicker recovery and potentially improve overall performance. As individuals age, their appetite might decrease, leading to a reduced food intake. We talked about that in one of our recent episodes. In such cases, obtaining adequate amounts of branched chain amino acids from food sources alone might be challenging, making supplementation a convenient way to ensure sufficient intake, particularly of leucine. Branched chain amino acids are also involved in a variety of metabolic processes within the body. Some research suggests that branched chain amino acids, again, especially leucine, might play a role in glucose metabolism and insulin sensitivity, potentially benefiting metabolic health, which is particularly important as people age.
We discussed protein sources in several episodes. The listeners might want to review episodes 23, Seniors Are Eating Junkier Diets, episode 53, Aging Well, Episode 69, Creatine for Aging Well. Episode 108, Whole Milk for Aging Well.
So to wrap up this episode, what have we learned?
Everyone, no matter the age, needs to resistance train. They need to eat high quality protein and increase their protein intake to 40 grams in the first and last meal of the day. If we do these things, we can combat the obesity crisis, defeat age-associated sarcopenia, and age well.
Age well. Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.